So, welcome to this episode of the Young Fabian Webcast. This week I'm with Catherine West, who is MP for Hornsey and Wood Green. It's my constituency, so I'm very excited to interview her. She's also the Shadow Minister for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. Also with us is Victoria Desmond, a fellow Young Fabian, and she's leading the delegation to the US this year. So both of my guests are well equipped and well qualified to talk about the EU referendum, which is on everyone's lips at the moment. So my first question is, what message do you think that this result sends to the wider European community and further afield in the Commonwealth?
Well, I'm very worried about what that message is, in that, you know, I fought very hard yesterday during polling day for the UK to remain in the European Union, and sadly across the country we lost that argument. Now, in my own constituency we won it very resoundingly, 75-25, but we do have to take account of the fact that the regions have felt left behind, and growing inequality, falling incomes, the response to the public services crisis around the National Health Service, housing, our schools, and a number of different fronts. Really, people wanted to kick out, they wanted to reject what's been going on, you know, over, I think, a decade of falling incomes and so on. And so I think really it was that particular vote, it was that election that was going to be the one where people felt they wanted to lash out. And unfortunately, for us in the Labour movement, we are internationalists. We believe in working together with others, particularly around like the peace argument, the peace dividend that the European Union has provided over decades now. All of that is at risk. And our region will be more and more fragile as we go forward, particularly when you think about the Front National, when you think about Alternative für Deutschland, when you think about the Austrian far-right party. You know, we are seeing some really worrying signs in Europe, and now it's almost as if people in the UK have ticked that box, not completely, but you know, UKIP have run quite a high-profile, you could say in some ways, xenophobic campaign in some elements of it. The poster, for example, that Mr Farage presented last Friday, a week ago, that was an example of it, and the tone of the debate has been quite harsh, quite unforgiving, and I feel at times intolerant, and not respecting the views of others. And I think that's been quite difficult for us to respond in a way that's convincing.
Just to bring you in, Victoria.
Yeah, sure.
What do you cite as the causes for the loss, for the Remain camp?
I think we have to recognise the generational issue here, in that young people resoundingly wanted to remain in the UK. And I think we also need to recognise that London voted differently than the rest of the UK, primarily. I think some of the causes are ongoing dissatisfaction with politics. I think we have to be honest as a party and look at where we're failing at the moment. And I don't think that's necessarily triggered to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. I do not think that is the answer at the moment, but I do think as a party we need to look at how we structure ourselves. For instance, the CLP model I do not think is very helpful. We're just turning into ourselves always, you know, we're not getting out in the community enough. I think when, you know, we had more of a community activism model, which Ed Miliband, to be fair, did want to bring in, because in London it's very different. I'm from Manchester, I know what it's like up there, and it is so different, the Labour Party culture down there and up here, and we have to recognise that we're not doing something right, because, you know, we lost the general election, and this is now a huge loss for our party, and we do need to have some very, very honest questions about how we structure ourselves. You know, I'm sick of seeing youth politics being young left people yelling at each other, and I think we've got too much of an election culture, which means we're too competitive with each other, and what that means is, as a party, we're just not connecting. So when we're telling people these messages, we're not getting through, and it's very important that we start to recognise that. And it's just very scary, I think. And I think the whole concept of having an EU referendum, which is so important for our economy, for our history, for everything, but also not giving people the skills or the knowledge that they need to really understand what the EU is about. I did a law degree, and my first year of my degree, I could not understand EU law at all. It was really difficult, really hard, and I don't know, we have no political education in this country. the only time, let's be honest, people hear about the EU has been in relation to Greece and the crisis. So we've had, since 2008, we've had negative PR about the EU. It's all been very, you know, very negative. And I think I personally predicted that this would happen. And I think it's just really sad. But we'll see.
Maybe if I could pick up one of the points about community organising.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've been in a position where I was a council leader of an opposition group for a number of years, and we really had to go back to reconnecting with one another as the Labour movement, and then talking to union colleagues, talking to community groups, talking to voluntary sector groups, then also talking to neighbours, and we developed quite a grassroots approach to elections as well. You know, we were brought together over a series of battles over health services and so on. And this is at the moment what we have to do again in the Labour movement throughout the country. You know, there's no such thing as an MP being more important than an activist. We are all Labour activists, and we need to get in and look at the problems that are facing people, understand what they're going through, be that the loss of a national health service, for example, a GP clinic, or an accident emergency, be that the loss of funding to your local school, which we know is going to come if we get more and more of these right-wing Tories and changing budgets. You know, be that around the nursing cuts to bursaries. We've got to be much more energetic in our campaigning. It's not just about Parliament, it's also about what happens on the ground in communities, and I think that's the key role that we as community leaders, which is what really an MP is, or a councillor or an elected member for the Labour Party, is to get into the community and really work from the grassroots up to try and talk about the issues that matter to people. And I just feel perhaps in some of our regions we've been a bit slow to do that, and perhaps that's why, perhaps with a gap, then UKIP have come in and been able perhaps to still the agenda a bit.
In regards to a more national perspective in the campaigning, do you think we've reached a point now where we've surpassed the campaigning of fear of losing your pension, fear of losing the economy, to a politics of anger, where it's anger directed at someone else? So it's not someone it's not the government which is responsible for your situation, it's the immigrant down the road, it's the migrant in Calais at the moment.
I think there has been some scapegoating going on.
Yeah.
And I think that now that UKIP have basically won the argument, together, helped by Mr Johnson, Mr Gove and others, but now that that group of politicians has been successful, they now have to propose what it is that they think they're going to do, because they don't really believe in public services, because just look at what Mr Johnson failed to do on housing, for example, in London. You know, 8 years ago we had an opportunity to really try and achieve more affordable homes for young people, and indeed for families on the waiting list and so on, and make London just more affordable, and yet Mr Johnson failed to do that. All we've ended up with is skyscrapers which are empty, sold off plan before they're finished, and that's a real symbol of his lack of intervention in a system where he really could have made a difference. Even if it was marginal, he could have made a difference, and yet he chose not to. And that's the kind of thing that we have to challenge this new grouping about, because that's not going to have a solution for young people. And that's what we want young people to get creatively involved with. I wouldn't encourage sort of anger or anything, you know, too angry, but what I would encourage people to do is, where there is a sense of fear or anger, is to become positively involved and think about solutions for this generation which will live longer than any other generation. So it has to be a lifelong solution. Think about sustainability, think about the whole climate change question, which I don't believe that the new grouping of politicians, Mr Farage, Mr Johnson, Mr Gove, I don't think they're very well known for their credentials on climate change, tackling climate change and other those things, and yet young people are very concerned about that. And so I think if you can create something different that people can choose from, then I think we'll have a situation of hope rather than hopelessness.
Yeah, I think Catherine's absolutely right that it's about turning anger into hope. But we have to acknowledge as well, it's a very good opportunity for us to engage with young people at the moment. I know I only got involved in politics because I was angry at the tuition fees and the trebling, and that's how we can get people involved. Now today, everyone is very angry. I woke up angry. I've been ranting quite a bit today. But it's about, you're going to have a lot of angry people. But how do we tell them now, well, it's your time to make a change? You know, how do we get them more engaged in politics? So many people I've spoken to are angry and furious, and how did this ever happen? Well, did you do any campaigning? No. Do you know what I mean? We have to start getting ownership of these issues. And if we want a different society, you kind of have to fight for it a bit more. And our generation do. We need to get more politically active, more involved, you know, just not necessarily in the Labour Party, but being more responsible citizens so that we do have a larger voice. And I do think political education is very important in that. And we need to make sure that, you know, that's part of the national curriculum so that people just learn the basics, you know, and we'll see what happens.
So your message is to turn the hate into hope.
Basically, well, the anger. I wouldn't say hate.
The anger, okay.
Yes. The anger, yeah. I think hate's kind of. I don't think anyone who's in our hate is such a strong word. I don't identify that with my politics at all. But I would say definitely today I'm angry.
Yeah.
But hopefully, you know, let's have our day of anger today. But tomorrow, let's be positive and think about, well, what we're going to do now, how we're going to work together, and how do we keep our Labour values going strong.
And just on the politics of anger, quite a strong commentator of that is Mr. Donald Trump, the Donald, as he's been referred to by Obama. Do you see his trip to the UK now? Do you see that as further lighting the fire of nationalism?
Well, it'll be interesting because I think we'll see a backlash to that.
Yeah.
What I would like to do when Mr. Trump comes is to invite him to meet some of my communities here, maybe to come to the mosque, to meet people locally, so that he can stop seeing people as objects all out there and recognise our common humanity. And I think that's something which London can teach him. So I would hope that when he comes, you know, some of us as members of Parliament might be able to invite him to come and visit.
I think he'll get an interesting reception in Scotland today when he arrives, because, you know, Scotland...
We've got history.
But we'll see. I think it's very interesting to see there is a bit of a correlation between what's happening with the white working classes in America and in the UK.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of research onto this, and there is this dissatisfaction, and, you know, our cultures are very similar, and what we need to identify what's happening. I think the most terrifying image I ever saw this morning was someone had done a painting of the new UK-US special relationship, and it had Boris kissing Donald Trump. And I think if that happens, that would be terrifying. And I think that's why, as young Fabians, we have decided that it's very important that we go to America this year and help campaign.
So there we have it, a bit of post-referendum analysis there from Victoria and Catherine. Very good to catch up with them, both very qualified to talk about the subject. However, the video was cut slightly short, meaning that Victoria couldn't fully explain the young Fabian delegation that she's got to the US in November. It's heading around election time. I think the exact date is the 8th of November. But she's just going to bring the fight to Donald Trump on behalf of Hillary Clinton. All the details are available on the Young Fabian website. If not, go onto their Facebook page. And if that's not helping, do email Victoria at victoriadesmond@hotmail.com. Or get in touch with me. I can send you in the right direction. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of the webcast, and do stay in touch for the next one. Okay.